I think there's a high cost of entry to games. If you want to make AAA games, you're going to be spending at least 10 million, if not more, because of coding and sort of the barriers that can create, especially for people who just aren't familiar or uncomfortable with code. The fact that you need sizable teams, depending on. So it's not to say that there aren't games that are made by one person or all these things, but there are a variety of barriers in the way. Some systems are lowering them significantly, so it might be Steam, it might be iOS or Android or some of these other things. And so you're starting to see, more people, different people break in. But I think that's the biggest thing. And the people who have access to the means of production, to use a to use a political term, are increasingly conservative. Making big budget games is very risky, and they tend to draw on a lot of the same cultural influences. So whether it's Saving Private Ryan, Black Hawk Down, Lord of the Rings, anime, superheroes, comic books, that kind of stuff. So if that's the limit, if that sort of bounds and defines, and then of course sort of where games have been before, right? So the more that's what is defining games, the more you're going to see, at least in AAA, a lot of games that are fairly similar. In terms of violence, I think you have to look at the broad landscape of games and sort of say it's like, well, there's tons of puzzle games out there. There's tons of kids games out there. There's a lot of stuff out there that isn't violent, right? There are a lot of money games in the top 10. There are a lot of games that make money that are violent. But to me, that's not something I tend to worry about too much in that sense. What I do worry about is to sort of say, well, what else can we do, right? And I think part of the challenge is that a violent interaction, the audience understands that, and the developer knows how to create that, to do things that, you imagine a world where, you had autonomous AI characters that could understand you and respond to you and that kind of thing. I think if you could sort of will that into the world, I think games would be very different in a short period of time, right? But at the same time, do you really need to wait for that system to be perfected in order to start pushing things in that direction? I think, the reaction that I had and many people had to, say, playing BioShock Infinite, where, it takes a bit longer to get a gun, and I was sort of like, okay, not feeling a little bit antsy, but not too much, really liking the world and, being up on Columbia and seeing all these things. And then all of a sudden, it's like I've got this, this buzzsaw thing on my hand, this hook, and I'm shredding guys' faces, and all of a sudden I'm realizing, wait, I actually was having a good time playing like the adventure game version of this game that had been up to this point. I didn't want to shred people's faces. Like, I actually didn't want to do that. In BioShock Infinite, they did a fantastic job inverting a number of the creative values from the original BioShock. So the original BioShock is set underwater, BioShock Infinite is set high up in the sky. BioShock 1 is, dark and depressing. Columbia is like bright and airy. Rapture is sort of abandoned and entirely filled with people who are hostile, the splicers who are hostile immediately. Columbia has sort of ordinary, average citizens. So in BioShock, when you arrive in Rapture in the bathysphere, and then all of a sudden there's a splicer trying to like cut its way inside, and you're freaking out, and you're not able to do anything. By the time they're sort of teaching you, the one hand, two hand mechanic of, shock them and then bash them with the wrench, you're ready to take out a splicer. And they had done such a good job inverting those values that when it came time to kill someone in Columbia in BioShock Infinite, it wasn't actually something I wanted to do. And not everyone had that reaction, right? But there were a non-trivial number of people who did. And it doesn't mean, some people are saying, well, should BioShock Infinite have been a shooter? That's not my place to say. They know the kind of game they're making, but, I think there is a desire for people who have the most money to make games to explore things that are different. And technology is one access, but their access along which they can do it. But there has to be the will to do it. And I think right now it's a time where publishers and developers are challenged to take risks because of how risky it is.